Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today, as we celebrate Labor Day, I thought I would do a little overview of all the various working people on the Waltons. Most of the community of the Waltons was made up of hardworking people and not much representation of people that just had money. Besides the Baldwin sisters, who had their own form of labor in recreating and making their papa's recipe and then having that available for people in the community. With the Walton family, there were times where we saw most of, certainly the men and boys working in the mill. We saw John and Grandpa and John Boy at times. Ben was probably the one who did the most work there over the seasons. Jason we saw occasionally, and even Jim Bob. And then, of course, in the episode, The Celebration, we saw everybody pitching in to help deliver an order that allowed them to pay off the rest of their deed. Besides the woodworking, the lumber supplying, the furniture making, we also saw members of the Walton family engaged in labor that involved keeping the family sustained. We saw various different members of the family doing the gardening, canning, smoking meats, raising chickens, milking the goat and the cow, generally keeping the house and feeding the family. And that's what certainly Olivia and Grandma were engaged in most of the time, and the girls helped a lot with that. Away from the house, we saw them hunting for food, fishing, trapping, picking fruit. In the episode, the caretakers, Grandma and Grandpa, decided they didn't feel needed around the house, so they went and took technically a job taking care of a neighbor's house while he was away. A couple of times when there wasn't enough money to be made just at the mill, John left, and at one point in the John's Crossroads took an office job, which he hated. And he also went and worked at the shipyards in the episode The Departure. Olivia made clothes for the Baldwin sisters and then got hired to work in the dress shop in the episode The Test. And she also ran a daycare in The Innocents and was a substitute teacher a few times, including in the episode The Emergence. As the children grew up, each of them pursued different sorts of work. John Boy had the Blue Ridge Chronicle, and then he ultimately sold his book and some of his writing and went on to make a living as a career as a writer. Jason worked at the Dewdrop Inn and then later owned it. Ben worked in the mill for the most part. Jim Bob, he worked a lot repairing cars and other machinery and things like that, and ultimately opened a garage with Jody after the war. As for Mary Ellen, she got her nursing license, and then at times we saw her working in the hospital as a nurse. Later on, she took over Nurse Nora's rounds up in the mountains, caring for those people. And we saw her working as a nurse for the picket plant. Erin originally worked as a switchboard operator, and she also then had a job at Pickett's as basically kind of running picket plant because JD was pretty useless at that. Elizabeth, we saw her at times take care of Ike's store, and we also saw her run a lemonade stand in The Revelation. Others we saw do labor in the community. Ike Corabeth ran the store. We also had the various ministers who came through, and this was not only their work, but their vocation. Initially, we had Reverend Fordwick, and then he was followed by Hank Buchanan. Andy March came through briefly, and then Tom Marshall. And we heard about Reverend Bradshaw, but we didn't see much of him. As far as teachers, we had a number of teachers come through. The one that we saw the most of was Rosemary Hunter, who went on to marry Reverend Fordwick. Verdie, we saw her do various different sorts of work. She did laundry, ironing, cleaning houses, mending. Harley, I think he mostly did sort of woodworking. We saw him helping John in the mill sometimes, and I think he also worked on machinery. Sheriff Ep Bridges, that was his work. Yancy Tucker, we're not sure that he ever actually held a job. He tried being a barber at one point. We're not sure how successful that was, but we saw him involved in hunting and fishing and trapping. And of course, in The Chicken Thief, he was stealing chickens, but that got sorted out. So I think Yancy just kind of lived off the land for the most part. Fanny Tatum was the switchboard operator. Flossie Brimmer ran the boarding house, and then when she left, Zuleika Dunbar took it over and ran the boarding house. Mrs. Breckenridge, we saw, she was teaching music, and she helped Jason with his music when he was trying to get the scholarship at Kleinberg. We had doctors. Initially, we had Dr. Vance, and he ultimately left because he wasn't really able to make a living on Walton's Mountain. Too many people were paying him in trade, and it didn't pay his bills. And then, of course, Kurt came in and was there for a few seasons. And after that, we never had a specific doctor on the mountain. The other primary nurse, besides Mary Ellen, that we saw was Nurse Nora, who was played by 2 or 3 different actresses, but she was around taking care of people up in the mountains. J.D. Pickett. J.D. ran his father's plant and turned it into a defense plant when the war started. David Spencer, now he did come from money, but he chose to follow a career as a doctor, as did his father. Paul Northridge appeared in the episode The Lumberjack, and so he was looking to make a living in wood, in lumber, and stuff like that. Now, he also came from money, but his father had a successful lumber business. They weren't like old money that didn't have to work. He did run his lumber company. Then we had Curtis Norton, who was a blacksmith that we saw in a couple of different episodes. Of course, there were many more people that passed through town that we saw just for an episode, and we maybe had a touch of what it was that they did, how they made a living. But that's just a little bit of an overview of some of the characters that were around more or that particularly caught my attention in terms of different types of professions that we saw. So thank you for joining me for this Labor Day. I hope that you are enjoying your day celebrating the fruits of your labor and your families. And this is really celebrating the working man, those of us who, get up in the morning and go do a job and make a paycheck and take care of our family through our own efforts. So I applaud all of you. And there's very few people that really have the luxury of not having to work, until perhaps they have the opportunity to retire. So the country really goes forward. The world goes forward on the backs of the efforts of so many who keep things running and keep us fed and clothed and housed and all of that. So thank you to all of you for everything you do to keep things moving forward. Thanks for watching.